and in which religion has acted as a bridge to peaceful coexistence and as a resource to reconciliation. This duality is what generates this controversy, or the fact that there is not a clear-cut relationship between these two variables. So how do we contribute to this? We investigate whether local religious practices, so we're really interested in religiosity and local religious beliefs more than in the institutional hierarchy of the church. So if people that are more religious have a stronger religiosity, if they were instrumental in the persecution of minorities in the European Middle Ages and in the period that stretches pretty much between 1100 and 1850. So we have a sample size that is at the city level. So we cover pretty much all of Europe, 2,100 years, 2,100 cities across a period of more than 800 years. And the persecutions that we will be focusing on are the Jewish pogroms and expulsions, so persecution of the Jewish people, as well as persecution of heretics. So here we will talk about the witch trials and witch killings that took place between 1100 and 1850. Given that the witch killings and trials have a highly gender dimensions, having this data will also allows us also to look at this side of this type of discrimination. As we know, like most of the witches were killed and tried and burnt at the stake, they were women. So what are we asking? We are asking whether religious beliefs intensified the persecution of minorities. And again, we are really interested in local popular religious practices. This is the reason why we measure religious beliefs in the period that goes from 300 to 1100. So it's a period before our persecution data. And then after having established the relationship between these two variables, we look at the plausible channels behind the religion persecution relationship. So we contribute to various strands of the literature, but first and foremost, the literature on the determinants of persecutions. So there's a huge body of work that has looked at why persecution happened. And the main motives that have been pinpointed by economists are economic and cultural motives. So, for example, it is well documented that during the Black Death, Jews were considered as scapegoats and as being responsible for the Black Death. So every time there is an economic downturn, minorities are usually accused for causing this economic downturn and are targeted. Both Lander and Voth, in a very well-known paper on the rise of the Nazi Party, argue that actually it's not much economic reasons behind. There are not just economic reasons behind persecution, but also cultural ones, so deep-rooted anti-Semitic beliefs. And they argue, for example, that the rise of the Nazi Party, or the increase in votes for the Nazi Party, can be traced back to these anti-Jewish pogroms during the Black Death. So, and it's a reflection of these deeply rooted cultural norms. Within this literature, we contribute to the literature that focuses on culture, obviously, given that we can consider religion as a subset of culture. But what the existing literature that focuses on religion, and specifically on Christianity, this is actually quite limited, in the sense that most studies have either looked at the role of Christianity on other outcomes, like economic development or schooling. These are really the most widely studied dimensions for papers that looked at the role of religion. But those that have looked at religion and violence are usually circumscribed to a very specific historical periods or to a very specific era. So we aim to contribute to this literature by providing the most comprehensive data set available to study this relationship in the long run. So how do we do it? We introduce a new proxy to measure the pervasiveness of Christianity, and this is the cults of saints. I will get more details about what this cult of saints means. we are able to construct this data set at the city level. So we believe that this is the largest data set with at least the widest geographic and historical historical variation in local religious beliefs that allows us to study this relationship in a systematic way. And as I said before, because our data on saints contains a wealth of information, including saints' gender, we can also test the progressiveness of gender norms. So there is a hypothesis in sociology brought about by Schulenberg that argues that places that had female saints were actually more progressive in terms of gender norms because it was one of the few ways for women to get visibility in societies. So we can test whether this is the case in our data, especially because we have the witch trial data that is a persecution type that targets specifically women. Okay, so a little bit of background on what saints are. So I understand that, you know, after having presented it a few times, since I grew up in Italy, for me, it's obvious what is a saint, since our society is fully imbued with this, with saints. So there are calendars, there are statues of saints. People, you know, every time you walk on a street, if there is a statue of a saint, you have to stop and, you know, pay homage to the saint. You can just go by. So it's really in our lives, even if you are a no-believer like myself, it's still, it's so obvious. But I understand that's not the case for most. So what is a saint? So if we look at this definition, these are individuals that post-mortem have been elevated to a higher state, and they can be considered as intermediaries between the believers and God. So people pray to the saint to intercede for them, to protect them. Saints are believed to perform miracles during their life and post-mortem. Actually, nowadays, to become a saint, you need to prove that you can perform miracles post-mortem. So yeah, these were this sort of intermediary between God and the believers. We consider this an expression of local religious practices, as I said. And this is because before the 11th century, in order to become a saint, you didn't need any approval from the Holy See, from the Church, from Rome. Everything was decided by a public cult. So there is this Latin expression of canonizatio per viam cultus, meaning a bottom-up public cult canonization. It's not a targeted and centrally decided canonization from the Pope. So this process really stayed like this. So what was reflecting, so the saint making was really a local affair until the 1600s. But it really from the 12th century onwards that Rome started intruding much more in deciding who was becoming a saint.
Laura?
Yep.
Laura, just quick clarification.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, son. Sorry.
Sorry. So a quick clarification. What do you mean by public cult?
So basically, let's say we are in a community in my suburb in Glen Huntly, and you are one of them, and then you conduct a very pious life. So after that, we can make a proposal that you become a saint, and then we start worshiping you, praying for you so that you can intercede for gods to protect us, and so on and so forth. So it was a local public cult.
Okay, it's not like ordinary people. It has to be like you really believe in this religion. You're the religion follower.
Exactly, and you need to make good deeds and have a pious life and obey to Christian virtues. I mean, of course, we have to think that in the Middle Ages, everyone was a believer. And Christianity had the monopoly over the provision of religion. There was nothing else really.
Okay, thank you, Ken.
Yes. What was the required donation to the church required to establish a saint?
So there wasn't any. So if it's true that having saints was also related to business, in the sense that there were pilgrimages and people visited the shrines, maybe donated some money, but there was nothing required from the church in this period. After 1630, saint making became a centralized process, so only the Pope could decide who became a saint, and it became also a universal cult. So everyone needed to believe, or even up until now, and pray to all saints. So before the 11th century, if you were a Melbourne person and you had your Melbourne saints, you didn't need to believe to Perth saints. But nowadays, as a believer, if you're a Catholic, you need to pray and believe in all saints, universally. But yeah, it was not connected or contingent on donations. But it is true that donations were made by pilgrims.
No bribes involved?
Definitely, there could be. Sure. I mean, I don't. So the point is that you couldn't lobby the Pope to get a saint, right? If your community wanted a saint and you were a priest, so often the priest was a mediator, then you were likely to get it. And priests wanted to have saints, of course, because it would also generate some economic revenues if you then get pilgrims. But yeah, it is a bit, and I don't know how much of this. How much competition was there among, priests or bishops to get saints?
Thank you.
Thanks. Who were saints? So at the beginning, if you think about it, after the development of Christianity, Christianity was in the Roman Empire was a discriminated religion. It's only in the 3rd century, in the 313, that became the official Roman religion. So initially, all those people who lost their lives because of their faith, also called Christian martyrs, became saints. So losing your life for the faith automatically granted you sainthood. But later, saints became holy people that lived these heroic Christian virtue lives, and they were designated by local communities, so they were believed to have performed miracles during their lives. And they were venerated, so people prayed for them. They were considered as people that lived exemplary life, dedicated to the pursuit of God. And as I said, they were intercessors, so people asked to intercede for them, pray for them, protect them. So it's a corollary of religion, of Christianity, having these saints around you. So again, we use the 1100 cutoff. So we have the universe of saints made in Europe between the year 0 and 1100. And this is really to avoid, to get into that period that when the church was making top-down decision on where to nominate its saints, because one could think, okay, if there was this strategic nomination of saints in location where, for example, there were already persecution or tensions with minorities, then that could obviously bias our estimates. And another advantage of having this cutoff is that all our persecution data are post 1100, so at least we don't run into reverse causality issues. So where do we get our data from? We use two sources. One is the Martyrologium Romanum, which is the official martyrology of the Catholic Church and has saints' biographies, or the so-called hagiographies. So basically, according to the Roman, the Catholic Church, every day of the calendar, you have a saint or more than one saint to venerate. And so in this Martyrologium, that's how it's structured. The 1st of January, you would have a bunch of saints and you would have some information about them. But then we've combined them with the Bibliotheca Sanctorum, which is a 21-volume sort of encyclopedia about saints' lives. And luckily, I found all the copies here in the Unimel library, and it's written in Italian, so for me it was sort of an easy job. And so we use all this data to generate this novel proxy for religiosity, so the existence of the cult of saints across European cities. And as I said, we consider this an expression of the devotion of the general population. So if a city gets at least one saint, becomes a treated city in our sample. And by definition, you are more religious relative to a city that didn't have saints. So why can we consider saints as an expression of religiosity? Of course, there's no way really to test this empirically, because how can you measure religiosity pre-1100? However, we have lots of qualitative evidence based on historical narratives first of all, loca sanctorum, so the places where the saints resided or was buried, were considered holy. So their graves and their relics were regularly visited by pilgrims. This is still the case today, nowadays, but imagine back then when there was nothing else to do and religion was a dominant component of people's life, that was really significant. Then another common practice among Catholics, which is still the case nowadays, is the adoption of saints' names at baptism. Furthermore, religious festivals around feast days were really a big deal, attracted thousands of people, stopped cities. They were really festivals of major importance. And then there was another practice, again, that it's still practiced today. So the burial ad sancto, so meaning that if you get buried near in the vicinity of the saint, you are supposed to get protection from the saints also after death. This is a picture from recent times in Catania, which is a city in Sicily, when they do the St. Agatha patron feast day celebration. So thousands and thousands of people come from all the villages. They take the body of the saint and the relics and they parade it around the city. They hold huge candles. So they all pray together. So it's really a big deal. I don't know if you've ever been to any of these things in Italy. It's quite folkloristic. Yeah, and imagine, again, this is from recent times. So in the Middle Ages, this might have been even a bigger deal when there were less substitutes, really. Oh, there's a raised hand.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just a clarification there. I hope it is just a clarification. How do you distinguish between religiosity versus the power of the church?
Yeah, this is a very good question. We'll actually have a section on this. So what we do, just to give you a very quick preview, what we do, we also control for well-established measures of ecclesiastical power. So we control for archbishopric or bishopric cities. So if the cities was designated and as ruled by a bishop rather than a prince. We also control for number of churches, church height, and church size. These are all widely used indicators in the literature to measure ecclesiastical power. So if we find an effect on saints above and beyond these measures, we believe that it can be considered something else that goes beyond ecclesiastical power. So it has to be related to religiosity. Because it is true, actually, it could be argued that places with stronger ecclesiastical power also had more saints. But yeah, we hope to get around this with these exercises.
Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so this is an example of the data. Sorry for it's written in Italian, but this is, for example, this guy is Ansano from Siena, saint, martyr. We know what he's done in his life. We know that so he was a martyr, so he was tortured to death because of his faith, and we know everything, all the details about when he was baptized, 12 years old, where he was baptized in a temple, how was he tortured, why did he die, what kind of miracles he did. And so on and so forth. So this is how we extract data and collect all our variables about saints' lives. So this is a snapshot of the data by country. So I mean, the data is will be at the city level, but we aggregated them just to give some visuals here. And Italy and France are out, otherwise you wouldn't be able to see the bars. But yeah, as expected, Italy has the largest amount of saints, and Milan and Rome were dominating really. They were the places with most saints. Having said that, the vast majorities of cities, I think more than 60% in the sample, had had only one saint. So for this reason, our variable would be just a 0, 1, dummy, do you have a saint, yes or not? But we also try to have number of saints as alternative explanatory variable. And this is the spatial data on, say, overlapping the saints cities with persecutions, Jewish persecutions, which are the blue dots, and the witch trials that are yellow. So you can see there's quite a lot of variation, geographic variation. There are some overlaps, but it's not that obvious that saint cities were also persecuting more. So we identify 1,735 pre-1100 saints, and they are in 355 cities, so out of 2,100. So our treated cities are 355. And then, so we cover most of Europe, at least most of the data, most of what is available really in terms of European data in this historical period. And here you can see there are 24 European countries. We will control for modern countries fixed effects, just because it's really hard to keep track of all the border changes throughout 8 centuries. But then to ensure that our results are not confounded by these, artificial boundaries, we also try to use a finer level of aggregation. So we do region and province fixed effects. We also do an analysis at the grid level, where we divide Europe in 5x5 case to ensure that, we can in some ways not create artificial results because of these boundaries. There's a question.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Just a quick question. Isn't the fact that there's a saint, you just mentioned that guy was tortured, isn't that an indication of violence and conflict being present already? So there's underlying potential for conflict and violence that leads to the saint, and it might in itself lead to Jewish persecutions later on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes. So I think there are 2 ways that we can deal with them. The first way is we remove martyr saints in the sense that, martyr saint could already be a proxy of a persecuting society that kind of perpetuate itself. So one way that we deal with that is we drop them. I don't know if I've actually got these results here today in the slides, but yeah, the results are very similar. Another thing we do, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, another thing we do if we are worried that there is some sort of endogeneity in our treatment, we use an IV to kind of deal with this. These are the 2 ways that, so we instrumental variable for saints.
Do you have a good instrumental variable for a saint?
We think it's a very good instrument, and our our instrument is the presence of pagan temples. I think we will get there, but the idea is that we mapped out all pagan temple from 2000 BCE, and the idea is that location with strong polytheistic beliefs were much harder to convert to Christianity, and that it was less rooted Christian beliefs. And in fact, in the first stage, we find a negative sign, and yeah, that's the way we get around it, because pretty much most of the talk you will see only OLS. And then we'll introduce the IV towards the end.
But aren't you kind of, sorry, but just real quick, a couple more points, but aren't you just kind of pushing back the problem? If there's a temple to begin with, maybe there's something in this geography, this location, in that culture, whatever, that was already prone to something that correlates with religiosity way before. Because there's this research now that shows sort of these, I mean, the persecution perpetuated paper you mentioned at the beginning kind of shows pogroms 600 years ago are predictive of anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany. So there's something in the locality, in the culture of that place that correlates with actions such a long time ago, which may correlate with the fact that there was a temple a long time ago.
True. Yeah, I mean, one could argue that a temple that was built in 2000 BCE is somehow correlated with episodes of violence in 1800s. Yeah, it's a bit of a stretch. True.
I'm not sure, because it correlates with many other things: economic, geographic, cultural characteristics of the place, and that in itself may.
Yeah,
anyways, you might get.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fair thing, but there's no way that we could find a super exogenous instruments unless we have some weather type of variables. But in terms of control, we control for a whole bunch of institutional and economic characteristics, which should take care of these effects.
Okay. Just one quick follow-up question. What are other reasons to become a saint? So you mentioned martyr is one, but what are sort of the other prominent reasons?
Oh, the prominent reason is performing miracles, conducting a life of pious religious virtues, being an extraordinary Catholic, not just a good one. Helping others, but performing miracles was another one. But we have many types of saints actually. We have hermits, we have monks, but we also have bishops, kings, and queens. So is a mix we have different social classes, and we will control for their social class as well.
Sounds like a game of chess. All right, yeah. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so we're now talking about the persecution data. So the persecution data, this is not, so the main addition really of the paper is creating this new data set on saints. We use already existing kind of off-the-shelf persecution data. So the witch trial data is from Leeson and Russ, EJ, 2018. And they have data on more than 43,000 women being persecuted for witchcraft. Of course, we know that these processes, the prosecution process was actually a proper judicial process in ecclesiastical courts. However, you needed someone from the local community to identify and designate who was a witch. And the witches are, by definition, were people that performed black magic and made pacts with devils. So the typical accusation were those of diabolism and so on and so forth. So even if it was an institutionalized process, you still needed someone from the local community to identify those women. So what do we know so far about the causes of witch trials? There are two main really stream of explanations. One is the religious competition with Protestantism, which is the Leeson and Russ paper. So basically they argue that places where there was more competition between Christian Catholics and Protestants, then we also had led also to more witch trials. That's so then a non-economic, non-price competition is one of the causes, trying to get the faithful into your realm of faith. And then, of course, we have the classic scapegoating and economic causes. So I don't know, maybe not so well-known paper by Emily Oster in 2004, where she looks at the causes of witch trials, and she finds that in times of economic downturns, it was more likely to witness these witch trials. There is a question.
Yes, Laura, quickly about, do you have any idea or information about how the gender composition was evenly distributed, or there was kind of imbalance across different places? Because you're focusing on women here. I wonder whether this witch trial will have some sort of correlation with the gender composition across different areas.
Actually, I've never come across anyone mentioning that there was some form of gender imbalance during this time. But yeah, I don't know. The answer is I don't know. I've never looked into this. We have population data, but it's definitely not split by gender. Maybe it's something worth looking into it, because that could be an important confounder. I'm going to write down. Yeah. So then, in terms of the Jewish persecution, we use the Anderson, Johnson, and Koyama data. They have data on 795 episodes of expulsion and 616 pogroms. And again, there's a huge literature on Jewish persecutions. And the main causes that have been identified behind the persecution are either economic or cultural. And again, it's widely known that there were widespread anti-Semitism among Christians in Europe. Christians accused Jews of having killed Jesus, of poisoning, and therefore causing the Black Death. In many occasions, Christian in the synods, there were bulls, papal bulls openly against Jews with openly anti-Semitic expressions. So this is something that is well known. At the same time, we know that there were examples in which popes were trying to protect Jews, like Pope Gregory the Great. Okay, so enough of background. Let's get to the data. Our empirical specification is a pretty simple OLS cross-sectional setup. So on the left-hand side, we have persecutions in town I or city I in country C, post 1100, and our main regressor of interest is these saints before 1100. What is this? This is usually a dummy variable. So in our preferred specification, it's just a 1 if the location is venerated a saint before 1100. And then we use a bunch of controls, population density, which in economic history, it's the usual proxy for economic development. we control for the presence of Jewish population in the Jewish pogroms and expulsions when we have that as an outcome variable. Latitude and longitude, again, is a proxy for agricultural suitability. It's widely used in all economic history type of papers. And one important one is this bishopric or archbishopric city. So we control whether the city was ruled by a bishop or not. So this is our the proxy that we always use for ecclesiastical power structure as a proxy for ecclesiastical institutional presence. And that's why we consider saints as an expression of religiosity, because if we see an effect above and beyond bishopric, that's what we believe it is. And then we also have data on saint types. So we control for highly ranked secular occupations, so queens and kings, as well as highly ranked ecclesiastical occupations, so popes, abbots, and bishops, to see whether these high-ranked occupations are actually driving our results, which again, these are again proxies of ecclesiastical power rather than religiosity. And then, okay, we have 24 countries, so we cluster the standard errors at the country level, but because of the small number of clusters, we also wild cluster bootstrap. And then we have here the country fix effects. Okay, so the first results are about which trials and which killings. So in the first column and column 4, we only use the baseline controls, and then we start adding bishopric cities, and we can see that once we add this institutional ecclesiastical power variable, the coefficients on saints present reduces, but it's still pretty strong and pretty large. So one additional saint leads to roughly 16 percentage point increase in witch trials, and roughly 9.6% increase in witch killings. And then in column 3 and 6, we also add an interaction between saints and female. And we see that having a female saint actually reduces your likelihood of persecuting relative to having a male saint. There is a question.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt again, but just a quick question. So you're looking at this cross-section over a huge time frame of 700 years or something. How do you deal with saints being venerated in, let's say, 1300?
Yes, okay. So how do we deal with that? So we don't, in the baseline, we don't add post-1100 saints, because that can be endogenous because of these, potential strategic locations where saints were located. But in one of the robustness, we also control for post-1100 saints, even if we know it's a bad control. And the results continue to hold. I don't think I'm showing this here, but.
And there's no way you can make it remotely a panel, because that would be so much cooler. Yes,
we will show also dynamics. So what we do is we did like a sort of repeated cross section at the century level. So we will show the effect by century. Yeah, I will have that too. Yeah, so these results on the female present, it sort of confirms this hypothesis brought forward by Schulenburg, that argues that female saint veneration is a proxy for relatively progressive gender norms, in the sense that we find that having a female saint reduces the likelihood of witch trials and killings. And as I said before, most cities...
You have one saint, and that one saint is a female. If you look at column 3, what does that say? Doesn't it mean that you're going to have more violence?
No, column 3. So this is pretty much, this is the 306. So this is having a male saint, and this is having a female saint on top of having a male saint. So this is having a saint regardless of gender. And what if that saint is a female?
Oh, no, wait a minute. So saints present is male or female?
Yes, regardless of gender.
So let's say you've got one saint, and that saint is a female. So you're going to have 1 and 1.
No, you're going to have less persecution relative to a place which has only males. Right. So CTA gets a 1 for here, and let's say CTA as a female, it gets a 1 here and a 1 here. And CTB gets a 1 here and a 0 here. So we are comparing city with a male saint with cities with a female saint. sorry, yes, with either male or female, and pretty much, yeah, we are comparing male with female saints.
Yeah, okay. I want to add those two coefficients, but you're telling me you can't do that.
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, there's another question, Tushar.
Sorry about that, but trivial question maybe. But I want to go back to what Michael said about the indigeneity concern here. That you mentioned that witch trials were more common in regions where the institutions were weak, right? That's one of the findings from the previous literature. So is it possible that where the institutions were weak, this was the omitted variable that was driving both the presence or the establishment of churches and presence of saints, and also witch trials?
Yes, so we will do some robustness when we also control for additional covariates that include also institutions. But yeah, that's a valid concern, because what if we have very important omitted variables like quality of institutions, and then yeah, we will do that. Yeah.
And a related point was when we talked about the panel setup, right? You talked about how you'll break it down by centuries. I'm a bit worried about that, because the effect of a saint is quite dynamic. It's not clear to me that a saint who was venerated in, say, the 1100s will have an immediate impact or a delayed impact. It's not clear. The theory on that is not clear to me.
So basically what we do is like look at pre-1100 saints, and then outcomes only in 1200, then only in 1300, then only in 1400, then only 15. That's what we do pretty much.
So then it's the X variable is not a panel then? So
no, these are all cross-section, just a repeated cross-section. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Michael, you have another question, or no? No. Oh, I can see some stuff. I know. Okay.
I've got my hand up.
Oh, okay.
Again, sorry, just to go. I think I'm reiterating Ken's point, if I understood it correctly. So, the first row there is the saint present overall, and then the second one is the interaction term with female.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
And so that, if I'm interpreting this correctly, what it means is that the presence of a female saint halves the pre-existing effect of witch trials.
Yes, that's actually correct. That's actually correct, because you have an overall effect of 90 percentage point, but then if you have a female, you reduce it by 11 percentage points. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the case for witch trials, and pretty much the same for witch killings. So when Ken was saying he wanted to add them, I think that's what he meant.
Yeah, no, that's actually true. You're right. The net effect is still persecution, but a reduced effect. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, thanks.
Okay,
it's true. Okay, if there are no other questions. So as I said, because saints' presence was prevalently either 1 or 0, we use this as our preferred specification, but we also try to use the log of the total number of saints, and the results are qualitatively similar. And then if we go to Jewish persecution, that it's a sum of pogroms and expulsions, we actually see, again, a positive relationship. If we look at column 2, that's an increase in 11 percentage point in persecution for treated cities. And then, interestingly, we find no differential effects of having a female saint, which sort of represents a nice placebo exercise relative to our previous hypothesis of progressive gender norms, because, yeah, there was no gender dimension in persecution when it came down to Jews. Is it a
sorry,
question
I got
now?
another question, Laura. Sorry to interrupt, but the hand raising thing. Anyways, can you go back one slide, please? And actually for that one as well, like you say saints types are controlled for in columns 2, 3, 5, and 6.
Yep.
Isn't that just breaking up that one dummy into different sub dummies? And how many saints types are we talking here? I mean, you mentioned one is martyrs, I'm guessing. Then, like, I think that's really an interesting dimension, which I would actually show here if it's not 50 saints types, if it's mainly 3, 4, or 5 or something.
It's 5. Yeah, it's actually 5 categories, and in the paper we have a table with the heterogeneity to show if different saints, having a different saints made a different, like, and we do actually find that martyr saints are more likely to lead to more Jewish persecution, which sorts of hints to the point that there's a persecuting society, that the society transformed from being persecuted into a persecuting one, which sort of points to the point, what you were saying, right? We don't find that for witch killings. And then overall, those highly ranked saints, if I remember properly, the popes and the kings, they were also more likely to be associated with persecution relative to monks and hermits.
But that changes the interpretation of that coefficient. Sorry, Simon.
No, I may just follow up that. So didn't you just say like that the same presence is dummy variable?
Yes. So let's say you have a saint. Is this saint a king or a queen? And then.
But what if you have multiple saints in a city? How do you categorize their types? If they have multiple saints, but they are all different types, how do you code them then?
Yeah.
I think we control for number of. When we had more than one, we had number of saints that were kings, or saints that were queens, or martyrs, and so on and so forth. So they are not dummies anymore, they're numbers, extra count.
But in this case, it's a dummy. How do you control the type then? How do you choose the type when it's a dummy?
Yeah, we actually just, you're just treated with having at least one saint, but then the same type can be more than one.
Yeah.
Do you think it's problematic? I've never actually thought about this. So your treatment is having at least one saint, but then your saint types is actually a count of the number of saints that are, say, kings, which usually is only one. But
I think that's problematic, especially if you want to interpret the coefficients. Like if you go from 1 to 2, you go down quite. But I can't interpret that coefficient then because there's these other sub-dummies.
Yeah,
so it's
I
kind
think
of like having it's kind of like having country fixed effects, and then you have sub-national fixed effects. Like it's a bit weird. Like I would show the individual dummies, and only in saints presence is obsolete if you show the individual dummies.
Yeah, when we do the heterogeneity type, we actually remove the saint presence dummy and we just show the breakdown. But you're right, maybe the best way would be having saint presence as a number, as a log saints, number of saints, and then adding the controls. Otherwise, that might be problematic. You're right. Yeah, I never thought about this. We never discussed this. Thanks.
And you need to be careful in how you interpret that coefficient then, I think, in terms of magnitudes. Because you control for these sub-dummies, which then I'm not fully clear how that works. It's not just the saint's presence, because with the sub-dummies will soak up some variation as well.
Yeah, that's.
Can I add to that what we have here is basically the coefficient is showing you the effect of one type of saint, right? So the main coefficient here, saint's presence, is just one of those small categories within. That's the coefficient that you're estimating here.
Yeah.
So what will happen is, so if suppose you have 5 kinds of saints, then and you put in dummy indicator variables for them, 4 of them will be estimated with the subdummies, and one of the coefficients will go to this saint's presence variable.
Yeah, we are actually not putting dummy, we're adding them as counts. So it's like another variable saying, okay, I have 5 hermits or something. If there were 5, if there is 4 more.
5 hermits.
But yeah, no, you're right. It's Thanks, guys.
There's a lot you can play with there. Like I'd be curious to see, is it the presence, the dummy? Is it the count, sort of? There's a lot of things you can do. But this one table, I think it's causing issues if you include the saints types thingy, because you can't interpret the coefficients that way. But you can resolve it just the way how you present that table. Yeah. It's just this way, kind of, you mix up some things in that 0.158 in column 2, for example, that combines a few things, and you can't easily interpret that. Yeah,
thanks. No, that's a very good point. I think the easiest way would be having number of saints instead of the saints dummy when we have the saints. Yeah.
I still think that I don't think that will fix it really. I think I would just show the types, like if you find 3 or 4 main types, I would show those as opposed to the saint's presence one, because the saint's presence one in the presence of these other variables is sort of, it's strange to interpret that coefficient for me. I can't quite, I'd have to think more about it, but it's not, you can't say it's 16 percentage points in column 2, because there's these other sub variables of the saint's presence.
Yeah, thanks. No,
but that's only a matter of how you show it. It's not, I don't think it goes to the core of what you show.
Yeah, thanks. Other questions?
My theme might be to have the age of the saints. So you could have the time from when they were appointed or anointed to time now. You see what I mean? Allowing for either the older saints to be more influential, or maybe it goes the other way, the younger saints to have more currency, and more people have them central in their memory and worship them, so that you could allow for either depreciation or the reverse of depreciation, appreciation, I guess it is, of the saints. So you could get some sort of a bit of characteristics of these saints rather than just a count of how many there are overall past those hundreds of years.
Yeah, we actually do an exercise called saints exposures where we actually test for that. We do it in the mechanism part. Yeah, hopefully we'll get there.
So just one quick question. I'll let it go. You know when the saints are introduced, so you know the year or decade or something?
Yeah, the exact date, yes.
So that means you can make it a panel, can't you?
No, because the post data. Yeah, we could make it if we use the whole saints that start in 1100s. If we make it contemporaneous to the persecution data, we could, but that would be a bit endogenous because.
Still, though, I think one problem you might get with referees is that it's a cross section, and if you can in some ways make it a panel, even though it might give you endogeneity problems and whatnot, that would make it so much more precise. It's my first thought, and so much like that would elevate the paper by a level. I think.
We thought about this a lot, and talking with Sasha Becker, he also mentioned that. And the best thing we could do is having this overtime effect. But yeah, maybe we should think about it a bit more. Yeah. Thanks. Okay, done that. Okay, so this is the part where we account for proxies of ecclesiastical power. So the idea that, okay, our saints' religiosity, our saints' proxy is really a proxy for religiosity and not ecclesiastical power. So what we do here, we use all these various proxies that have been used by the literature. So bishopric or archbishopric. We then control for number of churches. If the church was large, if it had a high nave or higher than the median. So these are all variables that have already been, or measures that have already been validated and used. So given that we find an effect above and beyond those, we are confident that this represents religiosity rather than ecclesiastical power. So one thing that we worried about, what about external validity? So we found these effects for witches and Jews, but what about other episodes of violence? So there we went and collected data on other types of persecution. So one of the problems is that these types of persecution are not well documented. So we collected data on the persecution of the Cathars, which were heretics, one of the many heretic movements that really came up during Christianity. So they had some unorthodox beliefs and were not accepted. So there is data, we collected data on them. This is all about, they were mainly present in France in this period between the year 1000 and 1300. And then we also have data about the persecution of the Huguenots, so the French Protestants and another heretical movement, the Jansenists and other minorities. And then again, we run these regressions with these different outcomes, and we find that our saint proxies still continue to matter. Then here, what about omitted variables? So it's been asked before, what about institutions, right? If it was really, was it the case that weak institutions could be correlated with also more episodes of persecutions? So we control for a whole bunch of variables. First of all, distance from Rome, since it could be argued that being closer to Rome would maybe related to stronger persecution. We control for the institution quality. So if the place had a university, since also universities were associated with more tolerance, and also if they had parliamentary activity, so they had active parliament and representation of the merchant classes. Then we have more geographic controls, soil quality, ruggedness, and elevation to control even more for economic variables related to agriculture. We control also for width suitability, and then for political factors. So was the city a capital of the empire or the administrative boundaries it was in, the political boundaries it was in? historically, like this is not a modern capital city. And then we also control for distance from the sea, which is, again, yet another economic proxy for trade and general enhanced economic activities. And we find that the results are still strong. Now, there are two big confounders in our analysis. One is the Black Death, and the other one is the Reformation. Why are they big confounders? There's actually quite a bit of work in economic history about these two events. And as we've said before, the Black Death is usually associated with the persecution of Jewish people. So could it be that our results are driven by the Black Death? What we do to address this is we do this in two ways. We control for Black Death intensity, so the number of plague years between 1345 and 54. And then we remove the Black Death years from our sample to see if our results are driven by that. And that's what we do here. So in the first two columns, we have Black Death intensity, and then in the 3 and 4, we exclude Black Death years, and we see that, again, we are safe. Another potential confounder is the Reformation, which, of course, represents the first challenge, a successful challenge to the monopoly of the provision of religious services to the Catholic Church. There's quite a few papers that have discussed the effect of the Reformation. First of all, there's a paper by Becker and Pascali that argues that the location that became Protestant actually persecuted more Jews because there was more economic competition between Protestants and Jews, in the sense that Protestants allowed for usury and money lending, or they were much more lenient towards that relative to Catholics. So there were more economic complementarities, and therefore Protestant cities were actually persecuting more. And similarly, I mentioned before the Leeson and Russ paper, arguing that when there is more Catholic Protestant competition, then we are expected to see increased witch trials. So are our results confounded by this? Are they driven by the Reformation, or are we missing out an important variable, namely cities that became reformed? So that could bias our estimates. So we deal this again in two ways. So if one believes that it is the Reformation that is causing this increase in persecution, we can restrict our sample to the only pre-Reformation period. And then if we believe that Reformed cities or Protestant cities became more engaged in persecution, we also try to control for them, and we give them a dummy variable. This is what we see. So if we restrict to pre-Reformation years, the results are still quite strong, and similarly when we control for Protestant cities. And here we can see that this Pascal and Becker idea that Protestant city persecute more, we can still see it in our specification. This is the dynamics I was talking about before, I referred before. So what we do here, we show the relationship over time. So our regressor is still the same, saints before 1100, and then we look at outcomes over time. And we see definitely the outcome is stronger before the Reformation, and it's still there, but much less precise for witch trials in the last 2 centuries. A bit better for the Jewish persecution, but not precisely estimated for the 16th century. So this is one of the ways we have to show a bit of dynamics. We also look at spillover effects. So could it be the case that the episodes of persecution that we see in a city are actually driven by neighboring saint cities or neighboring persecuting cities? So what we do here, we look at whether a city had a neighbor city within 10 Ks had a saint or persecuted Jews or the witch trials or killings. And we actually see that there is quite a local effect of saints. Really, there's no spillovers, so the effects are not driven by nearby locations, but it's quite local in nature. And we do this also when we do the 5 Ks threshold and 5 Ks being until 30 Ks. We have a lot of robustness tests. As I said, the region and county fixed effects. We remove the outliers. We remove countries one by one. It's a quick figure to show. And there doesn't seem that any country is driving the results. It's good news for us. We control for post-1100 saints, even if it's an endogenous variable. Use count models. So we look at the extensive margin of persecution rather than just having a dummy 0, 1. We do the grids level analysis, where we aggregate, we divide the Europe in grids of 25, 50, 75, 100 Ks. We also add the grid fixed effects to our main specification instead of doing the analysis at the grid level. We try the conditional logit since we have binary outcomes. It's not that nice to estimate, but the baseline results go through. And then we also do some randomized inference where we randomly allocate saints around cities. And luckily, we see that all these randomized orderings are away from our actual estimates. So that's reassuring. Now, let's get to the very cool IV that I mentioned before. So even if we are trying to argue that pre-1100 saints cults were exogenous, but actually there is no really way to prove exogeneity. There could be still some factors that were correlated to pre-1100 saints and post-1100 persecutions. So what we do is use this IV that isolates plausibly exogenous variation in saints veneration, which is Christian, so pagan temple location. So namely location with a long established non-monotheistic beliefs, which were places where the spread of Christianity was more difficult. So what we do is we get data from Pleiades and the digital atlas of Roman and medieval civilizations, and we geocode all those temples built between 2000 BC and 300. And we use that as an ID for saints' presence. So that's how our first stage would look like. As expected, we see a negative sign between pagan temples, so whether there was, or actually the number of pagan temples within 50 Ks of having a saint. That's suggesting that, yeah, places with stronger polytheistic beliefs were less likely to venerate a saint. And then, yeah, the second stage results are a bit larger. But then in line with the OLS in terms of significance. So because our instrument is a bit weak, especially with the Jewish persecution, we also do the close exoge test. So we look at this Conley et al. Method for having bounds, in the sense that we check whether the instrument had a direct effect on the persecutions. So maybe that in a way could answer to Michael's question about what if there was a direct effect of pagan temples on persecutions. And we actually find that the point estimates remain significant, and we do not find any evidence of direct effect. But I see questions.
Yeah, I got a question, but I think somebody else has too. But just real quick, why do you lose 200 something observations? You had 2000 something, and now you go to 1900.
The reason is that not all of Europe, the temple data does not cover all of Europe. I don't remember now if we lose Romania. I don't remember which country. We lose some countries. So we couldn't give them zeros. It's just the data wasn't there. Yeah.
Okay. And are results robust to, you say within 50 kilometers, but 50 kilometers seems like, if I don't have a car or something, 50 kilometers is a big space. Is that robust to going smaller?
Yeah, we go smaller as well. So 50 Ks is motivated because it would it's 2 walking days. So it would take you 2 days to cover 50 Ks according to historical sources. That was the motivation for this. But we try also 30, not more than, I think larger than 50 is a bit problematic, but lower, I think the 25 was also fine.
Okay, thanks.
What is this Devika, I think?
Yeah, hi, Laura. I just wanted to ask, with the pagan temples that you're now mentioning, have you checked for a relationship between the presence of a pagan temple and whether you'd have like a female saint venerated there? Will that change anything?
Oh, we didn't do. So do you think that in general, I mean, pagans were more progressive in their gender norm, more likely? Yeah, because there were lots of goddesses, right?
Yeah.
Athena and Aphrodite, yeah, whatever the English name. Yeah, that's a good, I mean, never tried. That could be a cool exercise to try.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so Now let's move on to the mechanisms, right? So, okay, we found this relationship. Let's say you guys are convinced and believe that there is. So what are the channels behind this? We look at two things. One is exposures to Christian institution. And the second one is a coordination channel. So whether we look at whether places that had both Christian and Jewish festivities during the same time, coinciding, if that led to more antagonisms towards outgroups. This is something that has already been shown by Iyer and Srivastav in the context of Hindu-Muslim riots in India. So it has been found that when Hindu festival and Muslim festivals coincide during the same time window, then there's more religious violence. So we try both of these. So let's start with the first channel. So the idea that exposure to Western Church altered pre-Christian norms and even psychological traits of European people has been put forward by recent research by Heinrich and a collaborator. So Heinrich is, I think, a sociologist, it came out with this book called Weird People and tries to explain why the West is the way it is in terms of cultural norms. And they argue, and they also have a science paper where they show that places that were more exposed to the church, and they measured it as being a bishopric city. Then psychological traits of people changed because the church introduced lots of different institutions. For example, the abolition of cousin marriage. They tried to promote to avoid co-location with parents after the creation of a new family. So they really wanted to break tribal links among people and create these new ties based on a new Christian identity. So what we ask is that, okay, if there were these new psychological traits, how do these psychological traits map with persecution towards others, or how the perceptions towards outsiders? And this is something that Henrik and the collaborators don't really talk about. So what we do is we measure exposure to the church in two ways. We follow the same ways as Heinrich and co-author in this is a science paper. They look at the number of centuries during which the city was bishopric. And then we also look at the number of centuries since the establishment of the cult. So we look at older saints versus younger saints. And we actually find a positive correlation between church exposure and minority persecution. So places that had longer exposure to both saints or the church in the sense of having a bishopric, they were more likely to persecute both Jews and witches. So that's the first channel. The second channel is the coordination channel. So the idea is that when you participate in this saints festival, you are more likely to cement these communal identities around shared beliefs, shared values, and really these are places and occasions to foster religious fervor. So we ask whether these may have sharpened the divide towards outgroups. And as I said before, it has been shown within the context of India that when there is contestation of a public space between two different faiths, that can lead to religious violence. So imagine a Hindu festival coinciding with, I don't know, Eid or some other Muslim events. We hypothesized that location where there were festivals for both Christian and Jews within the same day or within a small window, like 5 days, were more likely to witness episodes of persecution. So how do we get variation in this? So we know that the saints follow the Gregorian calendar, so it's fixed over time. However, Jewish festivals follow the lunar calendar, so there's year-to-year variation. So we measure the number of time a Jewish festival falls within the same window of a saint feast days for over 800 years. And then we run regression to check if we find evidence of this. And we do find that when there is these alignments in festivals, there is actually a higher likelihood of persecution. So there is a 1% increase in the times of religious festival falls within the same day. So this is the first estimates, leads to around 2 percentage point increase in persecution. And actually within the 5 days, we see the effect is still significant, but decreases a little bit over time. Okay, so to conclude, before I conclude, there's a question.
Sorry, just a quick suggestion, and I don't know how useful it is, but you can do a panel analysis for the last result you showed us, right? The conflict between a Georgian and lunar calendar festival and whether there were more persecutions.
Yeah, you're right. So yes, we definitely, because we are now collapsing number of time. There was this overlap within 800 years, but we could do it as a final level. Yes, true.
Right,
yeah.
So, and a related question about the first mechanism. So I understand the second mechanism, the incentive is the public space, right? Like, who can acquire the public space. So what is the incentive in the first mechanism, right? Why would you want to follow the church more? Like, is there a clear incentive?
The argument is that your psychological traits have changed more relative to someone that has been less exposed. So if you think, for example, an Italian that have been exposed to Christianity for much longer, for example, than a German or some of the Slavic, which were countries that were actually converted later, or Scandinavian countries. So their psychological traits changed less, so they'll have internalized less these insider-outsider concept, and therefore more likely to persecute. So that's the idea. So it's a change in psychology.
Okay, so the reason why I'm struggling with that is basically that's a behavioral explanation, right?
Yeah.
So where I'm coming from, like there has to be a rational reason for people to change their behavior as well, right? So I'm sorry, I'm pushing you a bit here, but I don't see a straight incentive for people to try and change the behavior.
So, well, I think one should go back into this literature that argues for the psychological changes, right? So why did they change to start with? Why did they change to nuclear families instead of having big families? Why did they break ties with the clans and started to become loyal to God and the church only? Yeah, that's a much deeper question. I don't know why that happened, but this happened, and therefore, yeah. But it's true. This is more of a hand wavy. We can't really pinpoint, okay, the psychology changed because we don't have survey on people behavior at the time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there another question or?
I have one. I struggle a little with the concept of religiosity here, because the way that I read this is religiosity as really a vehicle for tribalism in a way. I'm pretty sure that Jesus didn't condone any of these acts of violence. He didn't ask us to go and persecute witches and things. And so that's what it's about. That's what it says to me that this is about. It's not about spiritualism. It's not about really belief in God or anything else. It's about tribalism. It just takes a different form. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I know what you're meaning. The message of all religions should be peaceful, right? So why don't we see manifestation of violence? That's the interpretation that people give to the scriptures, and that, having said that, there was also official documents, the synods from the Vatican saying, well, the Jews are inferior people, they have killed Jesus, we should persecute them. So it actually was coming also from the official lines of the church. So if it was just tribalism, yes, we should see people that have less saints than to have less.
So again, it's about the power of the church. I know you were saying that you were trying to control for all of these things, but that's what it means to me when I read these results. It's about the power of the church in using their religiosity as a vehicle for tribalism. So it's just that when the title of the work is how does a religiosity affect these behaviors, I struggle a little bit just for that reason. So
there's no way to actually measure religiosity in the way we measure it in a modern way, right? But then how would you interpret finding still an effect of saints after we control for ecclesiastical power? There's got to be something residual above and beyond the church presence, the church institutions, that leads people to so basically these saints and their festivals, they just instigated religious fervor. Think about priests having a sermon against non-believers or those who killed Jesus. And then you have the festival.
Tribalism.
Well, if I can jump in, Inga calls it tribalism, but it's...
Michael, can we let Laura finish? wrap up first, and because we have only 2 minutes left, and we can, if Laura, are you willing to stay a bit longer after?
Sure.
Conclude? Okay, then we leave the questions. Everybody hold on your questions. I know you're keen to ask questions, but let Laura finish and wrap up, and then we can let you to ask your questions.
Yeah, sounds good. I actually had finished. So basically, this paper has contributed to understanding the role of religiosity in the perpetration of episodes of violence against minority. And we did that by creating this new plausible proxy for religious fervor, the cult of saints. And we've documented this positive relationship between religion and persecution episodes. So when digging behind the mechanisms, potential channels behind it, we find that these results were driven by the change in psychology brought about by the exposure to the church, as well as increased coordination during saints' festivals that increased religious fervor. And that's it. Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you so much. So let's kind of wrap up the presentation today. If you have questions you want to ask, feel free to stay. Laura has indicated she's willing to answer more questions, and otherwise feel free to leave. And thank you for participating again. So now, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Cool topic, very interesting. Drawing on what Inga just said, she called it tribalism, but it could be a very rational mechanism of there's an in-group versus out-group. I mean, religiosity, I associate spirituality with that as well, perhaps, but we all understand different things under that term. So I think it's very important what you call this thing. And religiosity contains so many of these things, but it could be a very rational mechanism of, you're giving me a framework of thinking in-group and out-group. And that's exactly Jewish persecutions. That's obviously an out-group. So just by me unifying it under the umbrella of the church or Christianity or whatever you want to call it, that makes it a very easy distinction between in-group and out-group. But it may not necessarily mean that it's religiosity in a sense of how religious am I, how much do I believe in the Bible and so on.
True, but how would you interpret then worshipping saints if not an act of religiosity?
The saint provides a symbol for the in-group. It could as well be the flag of my football club. It's an alternative explanation.
That's exactly what I meant, by the way, Michael.
I'm not saying you're wrong, but the religiosity is one potential channel that you group under religiosity, kind of. But it's just an in-group, out-group is the more general way of framing it.
But then, how would you call it?
In-group, out-group.
In groups and persecution.
Can I add to Michael's point, Laura?
A strong brand and a weaker brand. A strong brand. You've got brand competition here. Industries have been known to exercise violence against the competition. To threaten them with violence and drive them out of business. You could apply that sort of industrial organization framework to religious institutions.
But the difference is, in an industry, I can choose which group I belong to. If I'm born into a Jewish family, I can't choose.
Sure, you can. Convert. You can exercise your individual choice. You're a human being. You can think.
At that time frame, 800 years ago, if I'm born into a Jewish society, it's tough to change sides. Then, I mean, theoretically, you may be right, but I don't know how pragmatic that was at the time.
So can I add to that, from what I know, there are many cultures where the God you pray to depended on the occupation that you're involved in.
Yeah.
Right. So sailors would pray to see God, and that will also affect the religion that you might adhere to. So in the end, what happens is this tribalism of religious fervor or persecution is just a way of getting an economic advantage over the other group. Right?
But then how you guys would interpret the fact that the non-treated cities, or the non-saint cities, persecuted less?
Yeah, so basically perhaps the non-treated cities did not have that division along occupational lines that made them pray to different gods.
Well, and they didn't give you this in-group, out-group distinction from the outside. You didn't have that strong definition of an in-group, which it could still be religiosity, like you say, Laura, but it could be just a basic in-group, out-group distinction. which could be derived by football clubs, by gender, by height, by theoretically.
Yeah, so I think something that came up another time I presented was that, oh, what if, the saint is just a local hero? It has not much to do with Christianity. It's just some proxy for the local community. Yeah, it's pretty hard to prove. Yeah, to think about these confounders.
I don't think that invalidates your results. It matters how you present it and how you describe it. And as soon as you mention religiosity, they'll go red alarm bells with many people, and you can't fully say it's the religious part of that. It could be anything else that's in that in-group. So you just need to be careful how you describe it.
Okay. But isn't it okay to call it religious fervor at the end of the day? I mean, it might not be religiosity. Exactly. It shows up at religious fervor.
That's what we had in mind. That's what we actually thought, that it's religious fervor. But isn't religious fervor an expression of religiosity?
See, that's that bit I'm not sure about.
Right.
It could be an economic motive behind it.
What if you call it symbols of in-group and out-group that make a group salient? The saint makes the Christian group salient.
That's a good idea.
You had your hand up for a while. I'll stop now.
Well, maybe if you are able to find some, religious classic writing, like have documented that they have to treat Jews or women in a particular way, like, in Bible, there are clear message, how they're believers, Christians should treat, these heredities, like these, gays, lesbians, like it's written there.
No,
right?
definitely. There were some, we looked into these hagiographies to see, and there were some saints that were pretty hardcore anti-Semite. So we could, from the speeches, they were saying that, not all of them.
But it can't be like related to the writing made by the church. Otherwise, it would go to the power story, right? Okay, but I mean, that's not really my question. My question is, so I try to imagine if I were a Jew or a woman at a time, and I understand that, if a place, a city that has a saint, and that means I have a higher probability of being persecuted, then I'll try to stay away from those places, right? I'm going to move around, and then, so this is somehow, I guess it probably diluted your estimates and, kind of underestimate your stuff. So do you have demographic information at the time about the distribution of women and men or these Jews? Where do they cluster? Or do they tend to stay away from those saints, whatever?
Yeah, no, this is a good point. Like, what about migration? The Jews selectively migrated out of places with persecution.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what we do, we control for Jewish presence, and in a way, we could check if, let's say, there's a persecution in 1100, we can see if, in the following year, in 1101, we still have a Jewish presence. So how long does it take for Jews to appear again in that city? For women, we don't have the breakdown, but that would be maybe a good exercise to do. So, to what extent does migration due to persecution affect?
Yeah, and especially you are using cross-sectional stuff. It's a bit difficult to do that. But Michael's suggestion earlier to turn into panel, and if you have this migration stuff, and that will allow you to control for that, maybe that's a way to go. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's
so actually you have anti-Semitic saints, so you have explicit evidence that some were anti-Semitic. That is a great information to have. I mean, it's horrible that that's there, but anyway, the fact that you have that information is actually quite interesting, because that means you could delineate. Presumably, if the saint is an anti-Semite, I would expect that to have a much stronger effect on Jewish persecutions. And then it's more general in terms of, it's not necessarily religion, but it's this in-group, and the role model of that group, or the sort of the symbol of that group, is an anti-Semite. It's much easier than in times of economic crisis to persecute the Jews.
No, that's a good point. So we haven't done it systematically for whole, because you would need to read all the sermons of all this.
But you could do that.
We have it for some. Like, there's some of the most famous, like Saint Ambrose of Milan, is like very well known to speak against Jews.
If you have writings about all of them, you can just run a text recognition program through it generate a rough. I mean, that would be interesting, I think.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good exercise.
Yeah, it'll be more interesting if you know that there are some sense are misogynists.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, definitely there were also those. I mean, on average, they all were, because I mean, they considered women they need to be subjugated to their husbands, obviously. So that's a doctrine, but maybe some were more than others. Yeah.
So a quick question about that. Like, using your entire panel, can you actually show that regions where women were tried more often for as witches were more likely to have women saints in the future? So now that's a different story, of course.
Oh, okay.
Is there an endogenous response in terms of, you know, who we choose as a saint, just to make our lives easier?
Yeah, so because we don't have this, I mean, we control for this post, so we haven't done much analysis on the post 1100, but then yeah, it could be the case, right? When you have lots of witch trials, and by making a female saint, you are kind of trying to
protecting yourself.
Yeah. The thing is that in this post period, then the Catholic Church from Rome had so much centralized power to decide who was becoming as female saints, and then yeah, it became like very sophisticated, because there were medical teams assessing which kind of miracles were performed, and I mean, it's still nowadays, like, to become a saint, you still need these medical teams that assess miracles. So I'm not quite sure what they do, but yeah, it became a much more centralized and organized way. So yeah.
Sean, you got questions?
Yeah, so Laura, so I'm just wondering some other underlying stories there. So my limited knowledge about the European history is that the conflict in Europe is quite complicated. It's not just the conflict between different factions within the Christianity, but also the conflict between the secular political power, between kings and the nobles, and also between the secular power and the ecclesiastical power. So one example is, for example, so the French, the lady, the maid of Lorraine. So it is her name is okay. Sorry for my poor pronunciation of the French. It is Jeanne d'Arc.
No, Jeanne d'Arc, yeah.
Okay. He was burned to death at a stake, but we know that is just because the war between England and France. But his death was just just sentenced to death in the name of some religious reason. So in that sense, that means a lot of the persecutions, I'm just wondering, actually can be caused by this political conflict between the secular power. And if you have the conflict data, wars between countries or between kingdoms at the time, I think that could, provide some additional stories.
So we did try that. We actually thought of even having as an alternative outcome. The only issue with these conflict data, they're all at the country level and not at the city level. So you would aggregate up and you won't have enough observations. So that's the only thing. It's not a city against another city. It would be a kingdom against another. And yeah, it gets pretty thin. But that's a good, that's a good question. To what extent were these persecutions actually motivated by infights among kingdoms rather than, and then it could be an additional control or something. Yeah.
Did you look at the bracket database?
Yeah.
Because I know they're all at the country level, but there's Kingdom of Pisa, Kingdom of Genoa, like some are actually relatively much smaller.
Yeah, I use the bracket because I've used for another project. Yeah, maybe that's, I don't know how granular, but then yeah, maybe you could assign all the cities within the kingdom. So I'm creating
at least the ones that are within not too big of kingdoms. I don't know. Might be worth checking.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
All right. Any more questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Oh, there's one more.
Inga?
Me again. Yeah, about that point about the Joan of Arc, which is the anglicized name, by the way, so that saves you the pronunciation problem, strong. It's so there are some that were both martyrs, both burnt at the stake, and also became saints. I think there was a Swedish one as well, but I might be wrong about that. Is that going to cause a problem for you? Just
for us, not because they happened post 1100, but definitely. I mean, there are so few of them that we shouldn't worry. Yeah. But yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Jeanne d'Arc was persecuted and then became a saint.
Yeah.
Right. Post. Yeah.
And I also just wanted to say thank you very much. It was an excellent talk. Very, very interesting.
Thanks, guys, for all the comments. It's been pretty good.
Laura, thank you so much. Are you still under lockdown in Melbourne?
No, it stopped, and we are suggested to work from home if we can. But as you can see, I'm in the office.
Oh, okay.
Because I was teaching 11 to 1, and I'm teaching a GIS class, and I need a high power. So I'm like, no, I can't do that from home. Right. But yeah, we still have the restriction, and we can't have visitors at home, but we can go out and see friends at restaurants. So yeah, it's fine. How about you guys? All is good, right?
Yeah. Well, we didn't really have very long lockdown. We're kind of pretty safe here, at least for now. But
I wish I could have come and given the talk in person, because I got relatives in Perth.
Okay. Yeah.
And I always think, I should visit them. And since I came to Australia in 2008, I think I visited them once only. It's just so far.
Right. Yeah. But still, we can't travel to other states, otherwise we can't come back.
Well, true. Well, there was a little window where we could travel, and I know friends that went to Northern Territory and Queensland, and now I'm thinking I should have done it, because now we're stuck again.
Yeah.
And how are the vaccinations going there? Are you guys?
I think people are trying to get a jab. I don't know. I know that we kind of refused to give more vaccine to New South Wales.
Did we?
Oh. Yeah, Mark McGowan says no. We're not going to give it to you.
But is it open only to over 40, so anyone can get it?
I think it's about 40 at the moment.
The same as you.
Yeah. There's a brief window that they say, okay, we can extend it to 30, 39, but then after a few days after the announcement, they cancel it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay, anyway, hopefully COVID will go behind us soon, and then we can visit each other.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Thanks, guys.
You again. All right, hope
Bye.
to see you soon.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.